Would God's purpose have been realized if evolution had turned out a little differently? Of course. Do you see yet? Are you getting this? How can we say that for sure? This much I think is clear. Given evolution's ability to adapt, to innovate, to test, and to experiment, sooner or later it would have given the Creator exactly what He was looking for. A creature like us, who could know Him and love Him, and perceive the heavens and dream of the stars. It's irrelevant how long the process takes. God lives forever. Isn't that fascinating? I'm on page 239 now. If we can see God's will in the flow of history and the circumstances of our daily lives, we can certainly see it in the currents of natural history, of course. This does... Oh, well, yeah, I want to read this too. Hang on, I'll be right back. A similar argument applies to another concern. The notion that evolution making nature self-sufficient leaves nothing for God to do. See, this was Stephen Hawking's famous statement. He said, I don't know if there's a God or not, but there's nothing for him to do. Nature has taken over. Nature has done it all, so God must be sitting around twiddling his thumbs being bored. Woohoo! No, not at all. It becomes necessary, a theological imperative, to find some element of the natural world that cannot be explained by scientific materialism. If we find such elements, then we can rescue God from the ranks of deist unemployment. I love that. Making God active and necessary once again. At least that's how the thinking goes. However, here's the problem with that stance. The adherents to this viewpoint always feel constrained to find events in the past for which the direct action of a designer is invoked, even though they steadfastly maintain that God acts in the present. That's exactly how He acted in the past. Should not God's will and His means of executing it be consistent through the ages? The Christian God isn't a deist one. Neither is Allah or the God of Abraham. Any God worthy of the name has to be capable of miracles. And each of the great Western religions, of course, attributes a number of very special miracles to their conception of God. Well, what can science say about a miracle? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. By definition, the miraculous is beyond explanation. Okay. Beyond our understanding. It's obviously beyond science. This does not mean that miracles do not occur, however. I'm on page 239. A key doctrine in his faith, he's a Catholic, is that Jesus was born of a virgin, even though it makes no scientific sense. There is the matter of Jesus' Y chromosome to account for, but that is the point. Do you get that? That's the point. Miracles, by definition, do not have to make scientific sense. They are specific acts of God, designed in most cases to get a message across. Their very rarity is what makes them so very remarkable, of course. An atheist, of course, will argue that miracles are bogus and are stitched together from the needs and the desires of the human imagination. Well, maybe so. To a believer, however, miracles are more than violations of the laws of nature. As they were once described by David Hume, they reflect a greater reality, a spiritual reality, and they occur in a context that makes religious, not scientific, sense. Well, to the non-believer, there is no spiritual reality, and hence there are no miracles. Yeah, we understand that. To a person of faith, miracles display the greater purposes of God, giving them a meaning that transcends physical reality. So, if this is true, why shouldn't we allow that the creation of our species was a miracle? Did you get that? The very evolution, creation of our species, Homo sapiens, all of us. Why can't we see that as a miracle? Why not agree that the sudden explosion of life in the Cambrian era might have been a miracle? See, in 1900, we could have easily said that the sun's fire was a miracle. We were unable to account for how the sun worked scientifically, so that it is a miracle. However, now that we know how the sun works, does that make it any less miraculous? It is the life giver on our planet. We're now far enough along in the development of science to appreciate that its track record suggests that ultimately it will find natural causes for natural phenomenon. That's a pretty accurate statement. There's no question there. God has fashioned a self-consistent reality in nature, and He allows us to work within it. I can't find anything wrong with that. I really can't. That's why I can accept evolution and God. Evolution is God's will. The way He made it is to be completely free. No matter what. It's free to develop whatever it develops into, and that is God's will. But it is scientifically self-assuring. Fabulous. God's miracles are not routine subversions of the law of nature. If they were, then the issue of why so many extinct forms of life preceded us would be a conundrum, since each one would have had to have been the intentional creation of the mind of God. If each were just another chapter in an unfolding plan, driven by the laws and principles of nature, the issue is not important. If God were just a magician, He could have made the present world appear in a puff of smoke. But He isn't. As the good Dr. Cosby has pointed out, He already knows that He doesn't work that way. We already know that He doesn't work that way. Theologically, now this is important too, on page 241, the care that God takes not to intervene pointlessly in the world is an essential part of His plan for us. Ian Barber claims that human freedom would be impossible without God's willingness to limit His actions. If all power is on God's side, what powers are assignable to humanity? But if omnipotence is defended and everything that happens is God's will, then God is responsible for evil and suffering, and God's goodness is compromised. This does not mean, as Barber is careful to explain, that God cannot or does not act in the world. It simply means that He is wise enough to act in ways that preserve our own freedom, allowing us to reap the rewards and consequences of our own free will. Even the most devout believer would have to say that when God does act in the world, He does so with care and subtlety. At a minimum, the continuing existence of the universe itself can be attributed to God. The existence of the universe is not self-explanatory. And to a believer, the existence of every particle, wave, and field is the product of the continuing will of God. Even if He's not personally doing it Himself, it is His will. Do you see this? That's a start. that can keep most of us busy. But the Western understanding of God requires more than universal maintenance. Fortunately, in scientific terms, if there is a God, he has left himself plenty of material to work with. There's no question there.